The night Greyhawk burned. Folks swore they saw more than flames licking the sky. A lone veteran staggered through smoke and gunfire, hunted not only by mercenaries but by the ghosts of his own bloodline. In the ruins of an old sawmill, betrayal cracked open like thunder, and a man once broken stood face to face with a brother who wanted him dead. The choices made there didn't just decide who walked out alive. They rewrote what family, loyalty, and survival really mean. Before we dive in, let us know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Montana wind carries a hard edge in winter, the kind that sneaks through denim and finds your bones. Caleb Dorn knew that wind. He had learned to square his shoulders and keep walking, head down, boots steady. Greyhawk wasn't much. One stoplight, a diner with coffee that tasted like yesterday, and a mill that shut down before most folks' kids were born. People here minded their own business, unless your last name was Dorn. He worked odd hours at Dorn Ironworks, the old shop his father built out of stubbornness and sheet steel. These days the place sounded tired. Belts slapped, pulleys sighed, the drill press coughed before it caught. The air held a permanent mix of oil, rust, and Montana dust. Caleb wiped his hands on a rag, useless as ever, and watched a bead of grease roll along the bench like it had someplace better to be. 35 isn't old, but his body read older. Afghanistan had stamped him. Scar along the ribs, a knee that clicked on the second step, sleep that broke like rotten rope. The bottle made promises every evening and kept just enough of them that he let it back in. When the sun slid behind the Bitterroot, he drifted to the rusted spur. With floors soft from years of spills, a jukebox that only knew sad songs, and a bar stool with his name carved by Ware. Folks nodded at him, the way you gnawed at a stray dog, half pity, half warning. Poor kid, someone muttered once, not quietly. Can't fit right since he came home. That morning, a letter waited on the shop desk, heavy paper, stiff envelope, a lawyer's name at the top. His father had died 2 days ago. That will put everything in Caleb's hands. Land, building, whatever else the old man hid behind locked cabinets and polite silence. He read it twice, then left it face down. Grief didn't arrive. Suspicion did. The man who rarely said good job now left a kingdom of sheet metal and busted motors. It felt like a test he hadn't studied for. He closed early, lights clicking off one by one, the shop dimming to a bruised blue. The concrete floor had a long crack running from the lathe to the back wall, hairline at first, then wider, like a river on a map. Caleb took a last swallow from the flask, winced, and slid the latch on the side door. Something answered from below. Soft at first, a dull knock, then a small, hollow rattle under that cracked slab, as if the floor had a throat and had just cleared it. He stood very still, breath held, listening. Then it came again. Caleb came back to the shop early, his breath white in the chill. He hadn't slept, just kept hearing that hollow noise on the floor. The air inside smelled of iron, coal dust, and old oil. He crouched by the crack, tapping with the handle of a wrench. Solid near the walls, but hollow right in the middle. His father had poured this slab himself, and used a brag that would outlast them all. Now it sounded ready to give way. On the bench sat a leather notebook he dug out of his father's desk. Pages crammed with numbers, arrows, strange symbols. His father had barely finished high school, yet these looked like codes. Why keep them locked away? Caleb turned a few pages, set it down, and dragged a pry bar across the floor. He jammed the edge into the crack, leaning his weight against it. The wall behind him groaned, mortar splitting. He dropped the bar and jumped back as bricks tumbled. Ash barked and lunged, knocking him sideways just before a timber crashed down where he'd been crouching. Caleb grabbed the shepherd's ruff, chest pounding. "Good boy," he muttered, voice raw. Together, they cleared the rubble. Caleb jammed the bar in again and heaved. The concrete split wider, stale air seeping up. A rusted latch gave way and a square slab lifted, revealing steps into shadow. Flashlight in hand, Caleb went down, Ash at his heel. The basement wasn't storage for tools. Crates stacked floor to ceiling, stenciled with faded military codes. A metal cabinet with a padlock sat against the wall. On the central table were binders stamped with seals Caleb remembered from service overseas. He pulled the lid off a crate. Inside were circuit boards, wires, parts far more advanced than anything Greyhawk's old mechanics had ever touched. His father had kept this secret for years. Caleb pried open the cabinet, snapped the lock, and found a safe. He spun combinations, his father's birthday, his own, until the dial clicked. Inside, neat stacks of documents, property deeds, certificates, bank accounts. On top, a sheet stamped by a Helena bank. Caleb froze at the figure typed in bold at the bottom. $200 million. His father had lived on canned beans and a rusted truck. Now here was a fortune large enough to choke him, before he could make sense of it. A sound cut through the shop above. A firm knock. Caleb tensed, Ash growling low. He climbed the stairs carefully and cracked the door. A tall man in a dark coat stood outside, leather folder in hand. His hair was slick, his voice smooth. "Mr. Dorn, I represent your brother Silas and your sister Marielle. They'd like me to handle some papers. Surely you understand. An inheritance this size belongs to everyone." Caleb's jaw tightened. The man's words were polite, but his tone was sharp enough to slice. "I'm not signing a damn thing." The visitor only smiled. Family ties can be delicate. He slipped a card into Caleb's hand and walked off, boots crunching on gravel. Night dropped heavy over Greyhawk. Caleb sat in the dim shop, with Ash stretched by the door. He almost convinced himself it had been empty threats, until glass shattered near the back window. Ash leapt up, barking with ferocity Caleb had never heard. Shadows moved outside. Caleb reached under the bench, fingers closing around his father's old shotgun, stock worn smooth. The door shook as someone pushed. Caleb braced the gun, hand steady now. Whoever wanted what lay under his shop wasn't going to stop. Minutes dragged, then silence. The intruder slipped away. Caleb forced himself back down the hatch, flashlight cutting through the gloom. He set the beam on another crate, smaller, tucked away. Inside, a second notebook, leather-bound, the handwriting tighter, the symbols dense. Caleb flipped it open, recognizing a code pattern he couldn't decipher but felt was important. He stood there in the dark, Ash pressed against his leg, surrounded by crates with military insignia. The money in the safe was only the surface. His father had hidden something larger, something that carried danger in every line of ink. Caleb closed the notebook slowly, the weight of it sinking into his palm. Whatever had started when the old man died wasn't close to finished. Caleb woke with sweat cooling on his neck and the taste of iron in his mouth. The dream had come again. Shards of heat and sand, the sound of men screaming, his own body pinned in a ditch while fire tore through the convoy. He always saw their faces first, his buddies leaning out of the Humvee with that half-grin they wore when they thought it was just another roadside scare. Then came the blast, ripping the air, folding steel like paper. He heard his father's voice layered into the nightmare, a voice that didn't belong there, cutting and cold. "You were never good enough to hold them together." Caleb sat at the edge of his cot, rubbing his temples, trying to shake it. The shop key felt heavy in his pocket as he walked Ash down Main Street. The shepherd stuck close to his side, sniffing the frosty air, ears pricked as if he could sense his master's unrest. Town life went on around them. Snowmelt dripping from gutters, a pickup rattling past, kids in heavy coats chasing each other across the churchyard. Yet Caleb caught the looks. Heads leaned together outside the diner, whispers rising and falling. "That Dorn boy," a man muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "Back from war, but never came all the way back. And now he gets the whole shop? Damn shame." Another woman clutched her groceries tighter and gave Caleb a wide berth, eyes hard with judgment. He kept walking jaw tight, eyes fixed on the cracked sidewalk. Greyhawk had never forgiven his family name, and it sure wasn't about to start now. Inside the shop, the silence settled like dust. Caleb pulled open a crate he hadn't touched the night before. Beneath layers of canvas lay circuit boards and polished metal pieces. Not farm machinery, not anything he recognized from his father's trade. He lifted one carefully, too light, too refined. A corner of tape still bore a torn label, the ghost of a NATO symbol scraped away, but not fully gone. His stomach dropped. His father hadn't just tinkered with spare parts down here. He set the piece back and rubbed at the back of his neck. Every new thing he uncovered pressed against that urge in him to just walk away, sell the shop, burn the notebooks, take the money, disappear. But another part of him couldn't stop. The more he found, the more he needed to know what his old man had been involved in. A low rumble pulled him to the window. Down the dirt road rolled a black truck with no plates he could see. It slowed near the gate, men inside lifting cameras, snapping photos like surveyors. They didn't wave. They didn't look curious. They looked like men cataloging a target. The truck moved on, but Caleb's chest stayed tight. He dropped onto the work stool, pulled the smaller leather-bound notebook into the light. The handwriting was tighter here, deliberate, each line of symbols more like coordinates than words. Ash lay at his boots, head resting on his paws, ears twitching each time Caleb muttered under his breath. Hours passed while he traced the patterns, his coffee gone cold, the daylight sliding out of the shop windows. Numbers repeated, letters reversed. At last, one phrase caught his eye, hidden between the strings of code, like it had been meant to be found only by someone patient enough. Sawyer Mill, he said aloud, the syllables thick with dust and memory. Sawyer Mill had been closed since before he was born, a carcass of timber and rust by the river's edge. His father had taken him fishing near there once, warning him not to go near the building. Rotten bones, the old man had said. Caleb had believed him. Now, staring at the word inked in a dead man's code, he wasn't so sure. The hair on his arms rose as the realization settled in. This wasn't just about money locked away in some safe. His father had tied everything, machines, secrets, maybe even blood, back to that place. The rusted spur bar smelled of cigarettes that had long soaked into the walls, and spill beer that never quite left the floorboards. The jukebox wheezed through an old Merle Haggard tune, while Caleb hunched over a glass, staring into the amber like it might give him answers. Ash was tied up outside, restless in the cold, his bark cutting through the night now and then. The stool next to Caleb scraped. A woman slid onto it, not asking if it was taken. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a loose knot, and her jacket had the worn look of someone who traveled light and often. She set a notebook on the bar before speaking. "You're Caleb Dorn," she said, not a question. He didn't bother looking at her. "Depends who's asking." "Rowan Hale. I'm a journalist. Independent. I've been digging into the Dorn family for a while now." Caleb finally turned, his eyes red-rimmed from drink and lack of sleep. "Well, congratulations. You found the screw-up son. Want a quote?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled a photograph from her notebook and laid it on the bar. "That's Silas, taken at the port in Seattle 3 months ago. The man he's shaking hands with, an arms broker tied to half a dozen bombings in the Middle East." Caleb's throat tightened. He pushed the photo back with one finger. "Not my problem. Silas can shake hands with the devil for all I care." Rowan's voice softened. "My brother was killed in Kabul. Roadside IED. The kind that turned the Humvee into a coffin. When I saw your name tied to an inheritance, when I heard rumors of a stockpile at the ironworks, I had to see for myself." The glass trembled in Caleb's hand. He wanted to tell her to leave, that whatever her pain was, it didn't belong tangled with his. But when she looked at him, he saw the same hollow ache that lived in his own chest. He muttered, "You think I'm mixed up in that? I think your family is. And if you don't face it, more people are going to die." Caleb stood abruptly, the stool tipping. "I didn't ask for this. I don't want it. You hear me?" He shoved the bar's back door into the alley, the cold biting his skin. By the time he made it back to the ironworks, the night was still. Too still. The padlock on the side door hung twisted. Ash whined, a thin cut visible on his flank. Caleb's stomach dropped. He rushed inside, boots crunching over scattered tools. Drawers hung open, crates pried apart. Whoever had come knew what they were looking for. Cursing, he dug through the wreckage. His hands found the safe, now cracked open. Inside, beneath papers tossed aside in the search, a small flash drive glinted. It must have been hidden deeper than they realized. He pocketed it, heart pounding. Upstairs, the shop computer whirred as he slotted it in. Files appeared, schematics, diagrams, list of materials. He clicked one open and froze. Lines of wiring, placement of explosives, triggering mechanisms. It was a design he knew too well. His breath caught. The same shape of carnage that had haunted his dreams. An improvised explosive device, detailed down to the smallest resistor. The room seemed to tilt. He braced against the desk, the words blurring on screen. The blast that had ripped through his convoy years ago. How many of those blueprints had flowed through his family's hands? Behind him, Ash whined softly, pressing close, sensing the shift in his master. Caleb's hand shook as he reached for the glass of whiskey he'd left earlier. He lifted it, spilled half across the keyboard. The liquid spread, dark and sticky, like blood seeping through sand. Caleb slid into the chair, head bowed, fingers clutching the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. A thought he couldn't push away whispered in his mind. It hadn't been fate. It hadn't been bad luck. His own flesh and blood had supplied the parts that killed his brothers in arms. The ironworks was blacked out when Caleb pulled into the gravel lot that night. The town around him had already shut down. Greyhawk folded into itself early in winter, lights out by 9, save for the bar and a few scattered porches glowing like tired embers. The shop sat hunched against the wind, every window dark, the old tin roof creaking as if it resented still being asked to stand. Caleb stepped out of the truck and felt that old knot in his stomach tighten. Something wasn't right. The moment he unlatched the side door, the air inside told him he wasn't alone. The shop carried its usual scent of oil and dust, but beneath that was another smell. Cologne, sharp and foreign, out of place in his father's kingdom of grease and rust. Caleb raised a flashlight, the beam cutting a shaky path across the benches. A voice rose from the corner, low and cool. Took you long enough. Caleb froze. His heart jumped like a startled deer, the light trembling in his grip. Out of the shadow stepped Silas Dorn. Shoulders squared, jaw tight, hair combed with the same precision he'd worn since they were boys. Time had carved lines in his brother's face, but the eyes were the same, hard, resentful, unblinking. Two thick men loomed just behind him, arms folded, boots planted like they'd done this before. "Silas," Caleb muttered, trying to steady his breathing. "What the hell are you doing here?" His brother smiled, but it wasn't the kind meant for family. "Same as you. Looking after what's ours." He walked closer, each step deliberate. "Let's keep this simple. What's under that floor doesn't belong to you alone. Don't be stupid enough to fight me on this." Caleb forced his back straight, though his insides were rattling. "You never cared about this place. You called it a junk heap. You said Dad was wasting his life building it. And now you're here to claim it." Silas tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "You still don't get it, do you? He chose you. Always you. The soldier, the good son. While I got shoved to the edge, watching him hand over the keys to a kingdom I could have run better than he ever dreamed. Every meal, every word, every damn look reminded me." His voice grew sharper. "But this stash down here? It's going to even the score. Sign the papers, Caleb. Hand it over." Behind him, the two guards shifted, the air thick with threat. Caleb's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. "No, I won't sign a damn thing." The smile vanished. Silas leaned in close enough that Caleb caught the bite of his cologne. "That's fine. Paper or no paper, I'll get what I came for. And when this place burns, you'll have nothing left but ash." With that, he turned on his heel, the men trailing him, their footsteps echoing across the concrete before fading into the night. Caleb stood rooted, pulse hammering, palms slick. He hated the tremor in his body. Hated how Silas could still pull him back into that boyhood corner where nothing he did was enough. Later, he found Rowan at the spur. The bar hummed with laughter, pool balls cracking, old songs bleeding from a jukebox. Caleb dropped onto the stool beside her, shoulders heavy. "I found something else," he said, voice low. "A flash drive. It's got bomb designs on it. The same kind that killed my unit." Rowan studied him, no shock in her eyes, only grim recognition. "If you try to carry this alone, it'll kill you. Maybe not today, but it will. If you put in the open, at least there's a chance someone pays for it." Caleb rubbed at his face. "Justice doesn't bring back the dead. "No," she said gently, but silence only buries him deeper. Her words clung to him long after he left, echoing in the quiet of the ironworks. He sat with Ash at his feet, scratching absently behind the dog's ears, staring at the old safe like it held not just papers but his entire future. He barely slept. By morning, everything changed. Ash was gone. The chain by the side door snapped. Paw prints scattered like a struggle had taken place. Caleb tore through the yard calling his name, then down Main Street, through alleys, even at the church steps. No one had seen him. People only shook their heads or turned away, their eyes sliding off him like he was already guilty. Back at the shop, the mailbox leaned open. Inside lay a folded scrap of paper, words carved out in a heavy hand. "Bring the notebook and the drive to Sawyer Mill, or you'll never see your dog again." The paper shook in Caleb's grip. For a long moment, he just stood there in the yard, the wind cutting across his face. He walked inside, found Ash's collar on the bench where he'd left it the night before, and held it tight. His eyes burned, throat raw, chest aching away deeper than any wound from war. He pressed the collar to his chest, rage rising like a fire he couldn't control. They hadn't just threatened him. They had taken the only creature that still trusted him, without question. Caleb whispered to the empty room, voice shaking but certain. "You picked the wrong fight, Silas." The shop was colder than usual, the kind of damp chill that seeped into Caleb's joints and made him feel twice his age. He sat at the scarred workbench, the little leather-bound notebook open between him and Rowan. A lamp cast a circle of yellow over the codes and symbols, but outside that circle the ironwork stayed swallowed in shadow. Rowan leaned in, tracing her finger across the page. "These aren't random. See how the numbers repeat? It looks like shipping codes, the way the military marks cargo." Caleb rubbed his temples. His head still throbbed from too much whiskey and not enough sleep. "So you're saying Dad wasn't just stockpiling junk. He was logging shipments." "Not just logging," she said, flipping a page. "Directing. Look here, dates, ports, weights. This is a ledger." The words turned Caleb's stomach. The neat rows of his father's handwriting felt like gravestones lined up on a battlefield. He pushed the book away, stood, and paced. "You're telling me Silas and Marielle have been moving this stuff for years, right out from under this roof." Rowan's silence was answer enough. Outside the ironworks, Greyhawk hummed with gossip. Caleb felt the weight of it every time he went into town. At the diner, conversations hushed the moment he walked in. At the gas station, a man muttered just loud enough to carry, "That Dorn boy's sitting on a damn arsenal." Another voice chimed in, sharp and fearful. "He's got ties to terrorists. Don't fool yourself." It didn't matter that he'd bled in Afghanistan. In Greyhawk, he was the enemy now. Each glance, each whisper pushed him further out to the edges, where there was no one left but Ash. And now even Ash was gone. That night, Rowan insisted on staying. "If they come back, you shouldn't face it alone," she said, settling into a chair near the back wall. Caleb didn't argue. Some part of him knew the storm was coming, and when it broke, he wouldn't survive it without another pair of hands. The storm came just past midnight. The first sound was glass shattering, then boots on gravel, quick and heavy. Caleb grabbed a shotgun. Rowan reached for the pry bar she'd tucked under the table. Ash's absence carved a hollow in Caleb's chest, but there was no time to feel it. The door burst open, and shadows filled the room. Muzzle flashes split the dark, the crack of gunfire ricocheting through the old tin roof. Caleb fired back, the recoil jarring his shoulder. Rowan swung the pry bar, knocking one man sideways into a pile of chains. Sparks flew as bullets clipped metal, tools crashing off the benches. "Down!" Rowan shouted, dragging Caleb behind the forge. He gritted his teeth, a hot sting cutting across his arm where a bullet had grazed him. Blood soaked through his sleeve, but he shoved the pain down. They used whatever they could, welders, clamps, the heavy press, to slow the intruders. It wasn't clean fighting, but it kept them alive. When the noise finally ebbed, the shop reeked of gunpowder and smoke. One man groaned on the floor, the others retreating into the night. The silence afterward felt louder than the gunfire. Rowan wiped blood from her cheek and looked at Caleb. "The drive," she said. His stomach dropped. He tore through the bench, the safe, the drawer where he had stashed it. Empty. In the chaos, one of them had taken it. He sank onto the stool, sweat dripping, arm throbbing, ears still ringing. The only hard proof, gone. They'd fought for their lives and held a line. But the most damning evidence was now in enemy hands. Rowan crouched beside him. "We still have the ledger. It's something." Caleb shook his head, bitterness rising like bile. "Not enough. That drive had the schematics, the files, the truth. Without it, we're just two drunks telling stories." The workshop was wrecked. Glass everywhere, bullet holes in the wall, the smell of blood and burnt oil. Caleb looked at Rowan, her face pale but steady, and felt the ground shift under him. There was no more middle ground, no hiding in the shadows. "If I want to end this," he said, his voice raw, "I've got to walk into the dark with them. The bitterroot would swallow them whole." Caleb and Rowan moved through the trees in silence, leaving the twisted wreck of the ironworks behind. Snow crunched under their boots, and their breath hung white in the cold night air. When they reached the old cabin, half hidden under pines, boards sagging with rot, it felt less like shelter and more like exile. Inside, the place was as lifeless as a mausoleum. Dust filmed the windows, cobwebs clung to the rafters, and the wind whistled through cracks in the logs. Caleb dropped onto a wooden chair that groaned under his weight. He set the shotgun against the wall, pressed his palms against his face, and for a long moment said nothing. Rowan knelt near the hearth, striking matches until one caught, the weak flame licking at brittle logs. The fire sputtered, barely pushing back the cold. She glanced at him, eyes steady. "We'll be safe here for the night." Caleb let out a bitter laugh. "Safe? I lost the drive. Lost the only thing that could have ended this. And Ash, God knows what they're doing to him." His voice cracked. He looked at her, jaw clenched. "Feels like I'm just running the same damn circle. Couldn't save my guys overseas. Can't even keep a dog alive under my roof." The confession spilled out raw, unguarded. For once, the whiskey haze wasn't their blurt. Rowan sat across from him, firelight flickering over her face. "You think failure's the only story you're allowed to tell yourself," she said softly. "But that's not who you are. You're here, fighting, even when every part of you wants to lay down. That's a choice." Caleb shook his head. "Feels like survival, nothing more." "No," she said firmly. "Survival is what you've been doing, what you're facing now. It's about deciding what kind of man you're going to be." Her words hit deeper than he wanted to admit. He stared into the flames, remembering the faces of men he'd carried in pieces, the sound of their laughter before it all went wrong. And beneath that, the cold echo of his father's voice, telling him he was never enough. Rowan hesitated, then pulled something from her satchel, a photocopy of a government seal stamped across a classified memo. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said. He frowned. "What is that?" "My brother's old contact in D.C. slipped it to me years back. It links your father to intelligence work. He wasn't just running contracts. He was working with the feds to stop the same smuggling ring Silas and Mariel are part of." Caleb stared at the page, the words refusing to settle. His chest tightened. So all this time, Dad was fighting them, not feeding them? Rowan nodded. "The notebook isn't just proof of crimes. It's a map, coordinates, a hidden stockpile. If Silas and Mariel get it first, they won't just own your inheritance. They'll have a weapon that could tear half this country apart." The room seemed to tilt. Caleb pushed back from the table, pacing, hand dragging through his hair. "Christ. And I've been sitting here thinking this was just about some money, some land." Rowan's gaze followed him. "It's bigger, but you got more skin in this fight than anyone. You're the only one who can decide what happens next." The silence was broken by the shrill ring of Caleb's phone. He froze. The number was blocked. His hand trembled as he pressed answer. At first, only static. Then Silas's voice, smooth and cold, bled through. "Ash is alive." Caleb's heart lurched. He gripped the phone tighter. "Where is he?" Silas chuckled, low and mocking. "That depends. You want him back? You'll have to make a choice." Bring me the notebook and the drive, or you'll never see him again. Simple. Caleb's pulse hammered in his ears. He wanted to shout, to curse, but the line went dead. He stood there, phone pressed against his ear long after call ended, the silence heavier than before. Rowan's voice cut through gently. What did he say? Caleb lowered the phone, his knuckles white, his eyes burned with a heat that had nothing to do with the fire. He made it clear, this isn't about property anymore. This is about whether I've got the guts to fight for something worth loving. The road into Greyhawk felt narrower than ever, the snow building on its edges like the walls of a tunnel. Caleb kept one hand on the wheel, the other pressed against his ribs, as Rowan read the scribbled notes from the battered leather journal. Her voice was low, steady, though the weight of every word pressed heavier against them both. The coordinates repeat here, she murmured, tapping a page where Caleb's father had marked a string of numbers. It's Sawyer Mill. That has to be the site. Caleb's jaw tightened. He'd known it before she said it. That derelict place on the outskirts, where timber once moved through and men labored from dawn to dusk. Now it was little more than hollow beams and broken windows. But his father had left more beneath it, and Silas had chosen the same ground to finish things. Rowan shut the journal and looked at him. You don't have to do this alone. I can call someone I trust, a federal agent. He'll know what to do with this evidence. If we put it in the right hands, Silas and Marielle are finished. Her tone carried conviction, but Caleb only shook his head, eyes fixed on the frozen highway ahead. The right hands? You think I trust the same government that sent me back broken and never called my men heroes? You think they'll care about Ash? About anyone except the headline? Rowan reached for his arm. This isn't about headlines. It's about ending something that's bigger than both of us. You can't shoulder all of it. He pulled away, breathing hard. I have to. If I hand it over, I'll always be the soldier who ran, the son who hid behind someone else. If I take it to him myself, maybe it ends different. Maybe I finally put this damn war to rest. Silence filled the cab. Only the squeal of old wipers cutting across the glass broke it. Rowan turned back toward the window, the reflection of streetlights glancing across her face. You're not the only one who's lost someone to this, she whispered. My brother died to the same trade your family profited from. Don't you dare think you're carrying this weight alone. Her words lingered as they reached the edge of town. Caleb slowed when he saw the old rail spur near the mill, its skeletal trestle rising against the night sky. A chill ran through him. That wasn't from the cold. That was when the headlights appeared in the rear view. A black SUV closed the distance fast, its engine growling. Caleb cursed under his breath. Hold on, he muttered, yanking the wheel. The first impact slammed them sideways. Metal shrieked. Tires skidded on ice. Rowan braced herself, clutching the journal. Another jolt sent glass shattering across Caleb's lap. Shots cracked from the other vehicle, sparking against their fender. Caleb floored the gas, weaving between snowbanks. Out your side, jump when I tell you, he shouted. I'm not leaving you. Rowan yelled back. You will, or this ends here. The SUV rammed them again, harder. Caleb swerved, saw an opening where the road dipped toward the trees, and jerked the wheel. The truck fishtailed, barreled off the shoulder. Now! Caleb roared. Rowan flung open her door and tumbled into the snow. Caleb yanked the wheel straight, drawing pursuers further down the road. Another shot rang out. Pain seared his shoulder, hot and deep. He grit his teeth, refusing to loosen his grip on the wheel. The truck spun, slid, and slammed against the pine. Caleb's head struck the frame. Everything swam in darkness and white. Somehow, he dragged himself free, the cold night air biting against his wound. He clutched the journal tight against his chest, feeling its weight like a lifeline. By the time Rowan reached him, her face pale, hands trembling, he was slumped against the wreck. Blood seeped down his coat, staining the snow. Caleb, stay with me, she cried, trying to press her scarf against his shoulder. He coughed, shaking his head. No time. They'll circle back. You have to keep this safe. Rowan's eyes burned, her voice breaking. Don't do this. You don't get to throw yourself away like the rest of them. Caleb met her gaze, the fire of something fierce sparking in his. I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing. For Ash. For every damn man I left behind. He staggered to his feet, swaying but unbroken. The journal still clutched him like it was his last tether to the world. The snow kept falling, heavy and endless, as he turned toward the black horizon where Sawyer Mill waited. Later, back at the cabin, he collapsed into a chair, breath ragged, blood dripping through Rowan's bandages. Outside, the storm raged, but his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond. His lips barely moved, but she heard the words all the same. I'll go, he whispered. For Ash. For the fallen. Caleb dragged himself back into Greyhawk long after midnight, his truck barely holding together, much like him. The wound in his shoulder had soaked through the rough bandage he'd tied on himself, each bump in the road sending a streak of fire across his chest. When he finally stumbled into Greyhawk Veterans Hospital, the night nurse at the desk looked at him like she'd seen the ghost of someone who'd been through too many wars. I just need a stitch job, Caleb muttered, gripping the counter to keep from collapsing. No reports, no questions. Just a needle and thread. The nurse frowned, but after a long look at his bloodied sleeve, she nodded him toward a curtained room. A tired young doctor came in, sleeves rolled, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in days. Caleb sat on the gurney while the man threaded the needle. You should stay overnight. Blood lost like that, the doctor started. No, Caleb cut him short. His voice was gravel, low but steady. Patch me up enough to keep moving. The doctor didn't argue. As he worked, Caleb glanced past the curtain, where two older men in wheelchairs sat side by side in the hallway, their eyes hollow, muttering to themselves. He recognized the rhythm of those voices, the broken cadence of men who'd never made it back all the way. PTSD had a sound you didn't forget. One of them looked up at Caleb and smiled faintly. You made it home, brother. Caleb's throat tightened. For a moment, he wanted to laugh at the irony, but instead, he simply nodded. Not sure yet, he whispered. By the time he left the hospital, his shoulder was stitched, his head buzzing from blood loss and memory. He realized he wasn't alone in carrying a ghost on his back. The fight ahead wasn't just for himself or even for Ash. It was for all the men whose voices had been buried in silence. Back at the workshop, Rowan was pacing near the furnace, her face pale when she saw him. You're insane for going there by yourself, she snapped. You should have called me. Caleb dropped into a chair, wincing as the stitches pulled. Wouldn't have changed a thing. This doesn't wait for me to heal. She crouched in front of him, holding his gaze. Then we need a plan, not just a suicide march. He reached into his coat and laid the journal on the table between them. We give him what he wants, on the surface. But I'll wear a wire. You said you had contacts in journalism. If we can record Silas, capture the exchange, maybe there's a chance someone finally listens. Rowan hesitated, then nodded slowly. I can get a recorder. But Caleb, if he suspects, he'll kill you before he even takes a journal. Caleb leaned back, eyes dark. He might try, but I'm done running. Outside, the night pressed and heavy. More black SUVs had begun appearing in Greyhawk. They idled at street corners, their windows tinted, engines humming low. Neighbors locked doors earlier, whispered behind curtains. By morning, the town was thick with fear. Caleb Dorn's hoarding weapons under that old ironworks. Someone muttered in the diner. He's going to bring hell down on this place. Another voice. He's working with terrorists. Mark my words. The rumors swirled like storm clouds, and by dusk, Caleb could feel the stares whenever he walked the main street. He wasn't a son of Greyhawk anymore. He was the hunted animal. That night, back in the shop, Caleb wrote a letter at the workbench. His handwriting was rough, the ink blotched from a hand that trembled more than he wanted to admit. He folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and left it where Rowan would find it. If I don't make it back, use everything we have, the journal, the recordings, the names. Don't let it die with me. Don't let my blood be wasted. He placed the letter beside the furnace and stood for a long time in the quiet shop. The iron smell of the old place clung to him, mixed with the faint scent of oil and gunpowder. Ash's collar still lay on the shelf, the little brass tag catching the glow of the firelight. Caleb brushed his fingers across it, then slipped it into his pocket. Rowan returned from town, carrying a small recording device wrapped in a rag. "If you wear it here," she said softly, fastening it beneath his shirt collar, "they won't see it." "But, Caleb, don't go alone." He touched her wrist gently, a rare trace of softness in his eyes. "This is mine to finish." The snow had begun again when he stepped outside. Big flakes drifted in the wind, catching in the yellow glow of the street lamps. Caleb pulled his coat tighter and started walking, every breath a cloud in the freezing air. Greyhawk lay behind him, its lights fading into the storm. Ahead, Sawyer Mill loomed in the distance, a black silhouette against the snowy horizon. His steps were slow, each one leaving a print that filled quickly with white, as if the world itself wanted to erase him before he reached the end. But he kept going, shoulders squared, eyes forward, a lone figure in the falling snow, walking toward the place where everything would be decided. To anyone watching, he might have looked like a condemned man headed to the gallows. To Caleb, it was something else entirely, a march not toward death, but toward the truth, however much blood it demanded. The old Sawyer Mill sat like a carcass at the edge of the frozen timberline, its tall frame rattling against the wind. Snow clung to the jagged windows, and the air inside smelled of mold, rust, and forgotten wood. When Caleb pushed open a heavy door, a harsh blast of industrial light flickered on, buzzing alive to reveal the stage already set. Silas stood in the middle of the floor, sharp in a tailored coat, despite the cold, his smile thin and venomous. Marielle lingered behind him, her presence colder than the steel beams. Around them, hired men gripped rifles, boots crunching on broken glass. In the far corner, chained to an iron post, Ash let out a hoarse growl. His coat was matted, his body trembling, but his eyes burned when they found Caleb. The dog lunged against the chain, desperate, yelping in recognition. Caleb's chest ached at the sound. "Well, look who finally crawled out of the shadows," Silas said, his voice smooth with cruelty. He spread his arms as though welcoming home and a strange brother. "Always the weak one, weren't you? Always needing somebody to drag you across the finish line. Father gave you everything. And what did you do with it? You broke it, same as you broke yourself." Caleb stood stiff, his shoulders screaming beneath the stitches. He held a journal in his hand, thumb pressed against its spine. "You want this?" His voice carried steady, though his stomach turned. He tossed the book onto the concrete between them. It landed with a slap that echoed through the cavernous room. Silas smirked, but in the quiet moment before anyone moved, Caleb's fingers brushed inside his coat, clicking on the recorder hidden at his collar. A faint green light blinked once before tucking back beneath the fabric. Marielle's heels struck sharp against the floor as she stepped forward. Her eyes were like winter glass, unyielding. "Do you want to know the truth, Caleb?" she asked. Her tone wasn't mocking. It was colder, like a surgeon about to cut. Caleb's jaw tightened. Truth stopped mattering in this family a long time ago. "Oh, but this truth will matter," she said, voice calm as a blade sliding into flesh. "Your brothers in Kabul, their deaths weren't an accident. The IED that tore them apart, that was one of our designs. A test run. The first shipment we moved. And your father, your great moral compass, he knew. He let it happen. He chose to look away." Her words hung heavy, crushing the air from the mill. Caleb's ears rang, the world tilting beneath him. He saw again the desert sun, the dust, the roar of the blast. Faces of men he had eaten with, laughed with, bled with, all gone in an instant. For years, he had carried the weight of not saving them. And now the ground shifted. It wasn't just failure. It was betrayal. "No," Caleb whispered, but it was as if he was speaking to the walls, not them. His knees bent, his body nearly folding. His father, the man he had still clung to as a memory of principle, had let him rot under the weight of guilt that wasn't his alone. The shame, the anger, the grief all tore through him like shrapnel. Silas's grin widened at the sight of Caleb faltering. "See? Even your ghosts are ours. We built them for you. You've been nothing but a tool, brother. And tonight, you'll give us what belongs to us, or you'll watch that mutt die for your stubborn pride." He drew his pistol with a lazy flourish, almost theatrical. In one fluid motion, he leveled the barrel at Ash's skull. The dog froze, hackles bristling, a whimper breaking from his throat. Caleb's chest heaved, his vision blurred with rage and despair. Every fiber in him screamed to rush forward, to put himself between that gun and the only creature left that loved him without condition. But he was rooted to the concrete, torn open by the weight of his father's sins and the cold truth of his family's empire. "Choose," Silas said softly, the words sharp as broken glass. "Give me everything, journal, codes, loyalty, or watch your last friend bleed out in front of you." The mill was silent except for the hum of the lights and the rattle of the chain as Ash strained against it, his eyes locked on Caleb with desperate trust. Caleb's hand shook, not from fear but from the avalanche of everything collapsing at once. The war, the lies, the betrayal, the blood of brothers, the shadow of a father he could no longer honor. He clenched his fists, nails cutting into his palms, forcing himself to stand tall though his body wanted to crumble. The mill was quiet in that cruel way silence can be when you know it won't last. The lights above hummed and flickered, casting long shadows across the wooden beams. Caleb stood in the center of it, chest heaving, blood damp on his shirt where his shoulder had split open again. Silas had the pistol locked on Ash, finger curled tight on the trigger, while Marielle clutched the journal like a trophy. Every sound seemed too loud. The groan of the rafters, the faint rattle of Ash's chain, even Caleb's own heartbeat hammering in his ears. Ash's eyes found his, wet and pleading. For a split second, the noise of the mill faded. Caleb wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Kabul, smoke filling his lungs, sand burning his skin, his brothers screaming as the blast tore them apart. He remembered their eyes most of all, raw fear, that desperate need for someone to save them, and he hadn't been able to. Now those same eyes were staring at him through the loyal frame of his dog. Caleb swallowed hard, his throat closing. If he let Ash die here, chained and helpless, he'd be carrying that same failure all over again. His knees shook, but something inside him steadied. He realized he didn't have to choose between love and justice. He could choose both. "You want a choice?" Caleb said, his voice raw. "Here's mine." He ripped the lighter from his pocket, flicked the wheel, and hurled it toward the oil drum leaning in the corner. The flash was instant, an angry burst of orange that swallowed the shadows. Flames raced across the floorboards, hungry and loud, forcing Silas's men to scramble. "Get him!" Silas roared, swinging his pistol away for just a breath. It was enough. Caleb lunged, his bad shoulder screaming like fire ripping through bone, but he reached the chain. His hands toward the lock, knife scraping metal. "Hold still, boy," he grunted. The chain gave with a snap, and Ash bolted free, teeth sinking into the arm of the nearest mercenary. The man howled, his rifle clattered into the ground. The room erupted in chaos. Gunfire cracked, boots thudded against the old floor, smoke curled from the spreading blaze. Caleb pulled Ash close, shielding him as best he could, when a sharp voice cut through the bedlam. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." Rowan burst to the broken side door, eyes fierce, gun raised. Behind her, figures in tactical gear surged in, the thunder of their boots shaking the ground. She must have tailed him from Greyhawk, refusing to let him face this alone. Caleb caught her eye across the haze, and for just a second, gratitude pierced through the violence. She had done what he hadn't dared hope for. She brought the fight into the open. The mercenaries didn't surrender. Bullets sliced the air, sparks flying off steel beams. Caleb ducked low, dragging Ash toward cover, the sting of splinters digging into his palms. Rowan fired back, her jaw set tight. One of the agents went down, his vest catching most of the shot, but the impact sent him sprawling. "Caleb!" Rowan shouted, voice raw over the din, "Get to the exit." But before he could move, a hand like iron clamped around his throat. Silas yanked him upright, slamming him against a wooden post. The pistol was gone, but the gleam of steel pressed cold against his neck. A knife, sharp enough that Caleb could feel the point tease his skin. Silas's breath was hot and furious in his ear. "You think you can burn this all down and walk away? You're nothing, Caleb. You hear me?" Nothing. You've been stumbling through life on dumb luck, hiding behind your uniform, behind your pity. You will never win against me. The blade nicked, a bead of blood sliding down Caleb's throat. Ash barked frantically, straining forward, but Caleb raised one hand, holding the dog back. His vision swam with firelight and gunpowder smoke, his ears ringing from the chaos all around. But beneath the fear, something else sparked. Silas's words weren't far from the truth. Caleb had stumbled, carried guilt, let himself believe survival was weakness. Yet here he was, standing between his dog and a killer, standing against a family rot that had poisoned everything he loved. "You call it luck," Caleb rasped, his voice barely carrying over the fight. "I call it surviving you." The fire had turned Sawyer Mill into a furnace, beams snapping with sharp cracks, as if the old bones of the building could no longer hold their secrets. Smoke curled thick, choking every breath, while the noise of gunfire and boots scraping against cement echoed to the cavernous space. Caleb barely registered the chaos anymore. His world had shrunk to Silas, his brother, his enemy, the man standing inches away with murder in his eyes. They collided hard, fists slamming into ribs, shoulders bruising against splintered wood. Every strike carried more than anger. It carried years of betrayal, jealousy, and silence. Silas's strength was wild, desperate, like a cornered animal. Caleb fought back with the discipline drilled into him long ago, though his injured shoulder screamed with every motion. The two of them rolled across the concrete, scattering burning debris as the flames climbed higher. "Always in my way," Silas spat, blood slicking his teeth. "You think you're the better man, but you're just as rotten as the rest of us." Caleb's fist connected with his jaw, the impact reverberating up his arm. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted a life that wasn't poisoned." A knife clattered near them, kicked free from one of the mercenaries earlier. Silas lunged, fingers brushing the handle. Caleb got there first, hand closing around the hilt. His chest rose and fell in ragged bursts. One thrust, and it would all be over. The feud, the threats, the nightmare that had been chasing him since the war and long before that. He looked down at his brother's twisted face, the hate etched deep like scars that would never heal. For a flash, Caleb saw what killing would mean. Silas's death wouldn't end anything. It would just stitch the same ugliness into his own soul. He'd carry forever, another ghost among so many already. Caleb let the knife fall from his grip, the clang drowned out by the roar of fire. Instead, he seized a heavy chain that had once bound Ash to the corner. He swung it hard, wrapping it around Silas's arms and chest, pulling tight until the man buckled. With a grunt, Caleb forced him down, the chain biting into flesh. Silas roared, thrashing, but Caleb planted a knee in his back and yanked the links until they locked. "It ends here," Caleb growled, breath searing his lungs. "But not the way you want." Agents surged in, weapons drawn, dragging Silas back as he kicked and spat curses. Caleb stumbled upright, every muscle trembling, Ash pressing against his side, growling low and steady. Across the mill yard, Marielle had slipped through the smoke with steel case clutched tight to her chest. She hadn't lifted a hand to help Silas. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, focused only on her prize. She moved fast, heels clacking against the concrete floor, convinced she was the smartest one left standing. But the exit wasn't empty. Rowan stepped into her path, gun leveled, her stance unshaken despite the fire painting the world red around her. "Drop it, Marielle." Marielle slowed, lips curving into a cold smile. "You really think waving that badge means anything? Justice doesn't win, sweetheart. Networks win. We have roots you can't even see." Her voice was silk, but beneath it was steel. She started to lift the case higher, as if taunting Rowan with the weight of everything inside. Then it happened, a muffled click from within the metal shell, followed by a sharp hiss. Caleb's trap, one he had rigged before stepping into this nightmare, sprang to life. The case erupted in a flash of fire and sparks, the force knocking Marielle backward. She screamed, clutching at her scorched hands, as the precious hard drives inside disintegrated into nothing but ash. Rowan moved fast, kicking the smoking case aside and pinning Marielle to the ground. Cuffs clicked shut as Marielle thrashed, her screams turning to furious, helpless sobs. "Looks like your roots just burned," Rowan said, voice steady. Caleb stood in the center of the inferno, chest heaving, watching it all unfold. Silas lay bound and beaten at his feet. Mariel captured and wailing in the dirt, the mill itself collapsing in flames that licked high into the night. And there was Ash, trembling but alive, pressed against his leg as if to anchor him back to solid ground. For a long moment, Caleb did nothing but breathe. The fire painted his face in orange light, but this time it wasn't the kind of fire that haunted his nightmares. It wasn't the explosion that took his brothers overseas, or the blaze of anger that had nearly consumed him here. It was something else. Choice. He bent, pulling Ash into his arms despite the strain in his wounded shoulder. The dog whined softly, head tucking under his chin. Caleb closed his eyes and let the sound steady him. Around him, the agents shouted. Rowan gave commands. The mill groaned and cracked. But in that small circle where he and Ash stood, there was only quiet. The blaze at Sawyer Mill roared like a beast finally let loose, flames climbing higher with each passing second. Smoke poured from broken rafters, turning the night into a thick, choking fog. Federal agents shouted orders over the crackle of burning timber, pulling back before the collapsing structure swallowed them whole. Caleb staggered near the exit, chest heaving, body screaming to give up. Blood seeped through the rough bandage at his shoulder. Sweat stung his eyes, but something made him freeze. A sound cut the fire's roar. A chain clattering against cement, a grunt, then a scream. Silas had broken free. By the time Caleb turned, he saw the flash of steel, the brutal swing of a knife, and one of the agents crumpled to the floor, throat slashed. Silas disappeared into the smoke before anyone could fire. Rowan shouted, "Caleb, get out! The roof's coming down." But Caleb knew he couldn't. If Silas vanished into night, this nightmare would crawl back again and again. The loop of violence would never end. He glanced at Ash, who stood rigid at his side, teeth bared, hackles raised. Caleb whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "This ends tonight." He gripped the flashlight in one hand, his old pistol in the other, and stepped back into the inferno. The beam of the light cut a thin line through the black smoke. Every footstep groaned against weakened planks, ash falling onto his hair and shoulders like gray snow. His lungs burned, but he pressed forward, listening for the faint scrape of boots, the ragged sound of Silas's breathing. The mill felt like a maze, corridors lined with warped timbers, machinery long rusted, shadows that shifted with every flicker of flame. Ash padded close, a low growl rolling in his throat. Caleb's pulse hammered against his ribs, a steady reminder that time was running out. Then it came, a rush of movement behind him. Silas lunged from the dark, slamming Caleb hard against the wall. The pistol skittered across the floor, lost in the gloom. Caleb swung the flashlight wildly, the beam slicing across Silas's twisted features. Sweat and soot streaked across his face. They grappled, the knife flashing too close. Its edge scraped Caleb's cheek, hot pain tearing a line from temple to jaw. He shoved back, ramming Silas into a rotten wallboard. The wood cracked, sending sparks of embers down like fiery rain. The orange glow lit Silas's face, contorted in fury, eyes burning as if the fire had moved inside him. "You think you're better than me?" Silas snarled, breath hot with smoke. "You've killed men too. The only difference is you hide behind your damn conscience." Caleb's grip tightened on Silas's wrist, forcing the knife down. His own voice came hoarse, cracked but steady. "I don't have to be a monster to survive. That's the difference between us." They wrestled for blade, both men trembling from exhaustion and wounds. Ash barked sharply, lunging forward, teeth snapping close to Silas's leg, forcing him off balance. Caleb took the chance, slamming Silas backward. The knife clattered to the floor, skidding into the firelight. For a second, there was silence but for the building's groan. Caleb's chest heaved, the gash on his cheek, dripping blood down his neck. Silas stood only a few feet away, chest rising and falling like a bellows, rage pulling his face into a mask that barely resembled a man anymore. Then Caleb saw it. Silas's hand pulling something from his vest. Not another knife. A small, round shape, the pin already between his teeth. The realization hit Caleb's gut like a hammer. Silas's smile spread wide, almost serene in its madness. "If I die," he said, voice raw, "we all die." The metallic click of the pin being pulled seemed louder than the flames, louder than the building groaning above their heads. Caleb froze, flashlight beam shaking over Silas's face. Ash snarled, body tense, waiting for Caleb's move. In that moment, Caleb felt the weight of every choice he'd made, every ghost he carried. He thought of his squad in Kabul, of their last terrified looks, of promises broken. He thought of his father's shadow, of Rowan's faith, of the town whispering his name like a curse. And most of all, he thought of Ash, alive and trembling at his side, the one soul he had managed to save. The air thickened, the seconds stretching. Silas clutched the grenade tight, grinning like a man finally in control. Caleb whispered, his voice nearly swallowed by the fire's roar. Not this time. The firestorm inside Sawyer Mill reached a fever pitch, beams collapsing like matchsticks, sparks raining from the rafters. Caleb lunged, his body running on nothing but instinct, slamming into Silas before the grenade could claim them both. They crashed to the ground, rolling across the soot-covered floor. The world slowed. He could hear it, the tiny metallic tick of the grenade, the echo of his own heartbeat, the distant crackle of fire. For an instant, it felt like time was holding its breath, waiting to see which brother would break first. Silas's face twisted with rage, spittle flying as he snarled. "You can't stop this. We burn together." Ash charged forward, a blur of muscle and teeth, sinking his jaws into Silas's arm. Silas howled, jerking in pain. The grenade slipped in his grip. Caleb wrenched it free, the metal hot against his palm, and with every shred of strength he had left, he hurled it toward the far end of the hall. The explosion ripped through the mill, a violent shockwave that made the earth itself groan. The walls rattled, shards of glass and splinters whistling through the smoke. Caleb's ears rang, the sound reduced to a dull roar, but he was alive. Through the haze, he spotted Silas, half buried under broken beams. His brother's eyes burned with hatred, his body straining to rise even as fire climbed around him. Caleb raised his pistol, arm trembling, the weight of years pressing down. He could end it. One shot, and this nightmare would never return. Silas laughed bitterly, choking on smoke. "Do it. You're no better than me. Always a killer, just admit it." Caleb's finger hovered on the trigger. For a moment, he saw Kabul again, the searing light, the screams, the guilt that had carved its way into his bones. But then his gaze fell to Ash, pressed against his leg, eyes wide but loyal. The dog's steady presence reminded him that survival didn't have to mean surrendering to hate. "No," Caleb said quietly, lowering the gun. "Not anymore." He grabbed Ash's collar, dragging him toward the exit as timbers groaned overhead. Behind him, Silas's voice cracked into a scream, part fury, part fear, as another section of the mill gave way. The last glimpse Caleb had of his brother was a figure thrashing beneath falling debris, swallowed by flame and shadow. The choice was made. Caleb wasn't going to carry another death on his conscience, not even Silas's. They burst out into the night, stumbling onto the snow. Cold air slammed into Caleb's lungs, clean and sharp after the suffocating smoke. His legs buckled, and he collapsed to his knees, arms wrapped tight around Ash. The dog trembled against him, chest heaving, for singed but alive. Behind them, Sawyer Mill surrendered with a groan, the roof caving in as fire devoured the last of its bones. Flames licked the sky, casting an orange glow over the snow. It was as if the land itself was purging the weight of secrets buried for too long. Sirens wailed in the distance, the steady cry of fire engines and federal vehicles drawing closer. Lights flashed through the trees, cutting through the smoke. Caleb barely noticed. For the first time in years, the storm inside him felt still. He lay back in the snow, face smeared with blood and ash, staring up at the dark Montana sky. The stars peeked faintly through the haze, distant but steady, indifferent to the chaos below. Ash pressed closer, curling against his side, the warmth of the dog grounding him in the moment. Rowan's voice carried from somewhere down the hill, shouting his name. He wanted to answer, but the strength wasn't there. Instead, He let his body sink into the snow's embrace, the world spinning around him. And then, something unexpected. A smile. Faint, tired, cracked at the edges, but real. The kind of smile that comes when the weight finally shifts off your shoulders, even if only for a breath. Sawyer Mill collapsed behind him in a thunder of sparks and ash, but Caleb didn't look back. For once, the past didn't hold his gaze. He had chosen another path, one that didn't end in blood. Ash gave a soft whine, resting his head on Caleb's chest. Caleb reached a shaking hand to scratch behind the dog's ear. "We made it," he whispered, voice hoarse but certain. The night carried on, the snow falling steady, covering the ruins of the mill. For Caleb, it wasn't just the end of battle. It was the closing of a chapter that had haunted him his whole life. And in that frozen silence, with the fire finally behind him, he felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. A week had passed since the fire that swallowed Sawyer Mill. Snow blanketed Greyhawk in a soft, forgiving white, covering the scars of the town as if trying to give it a clean slate. Folks spoke differently now when Caleb's name came up. The man they once called a drunk and a failure had become the one who dragged a hidden network of smugglers into the light. On the corner of Main Street, outside the diner, old men leaned on the railing and whispered about the Dorn case. The gossip carried on the wind, not with scorn, but with something like respect. Silas hadn't died in the blaze, though many wished he had. Rescuers pulled him from the wreckage, his body broken beyond repair. He lay now in a hospital bed, his eyes open but vacant, a once dangerous man reduced to a shell. The law would circle him like wolves, but he'd never stand trial the way he'd imagined. He was alive, yes, but stripped of the one thing he prized above all, power. Marielle hadn't been so lucky. The agents had her in custody before dawn broke. She sat now in federal cell, her sharp tongue useless against iron bars. Every property, every account, every ill-gotten luxury was seized. The papers called it the Dorn case, splashing her photo across their pages, the icy smile of a woman who thought herself untouchable. For Caleb, though, the headlines meant little. His war had always been closer to the bone. One morning, he walked through the doors of Greyhawk Veterans Hospital. His shoulder still ached from the wound, but it wasn't pain that slowed his steps. The hallways smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee, the low hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Men sat in the waiting room, some with blank stares, others fiddling with their hands or bouncing a leg. Caleb recognized the look. He'd seen it in mirrors, in the eyes of men huddled in tents overseas, in the reflection of dark nights when sleep wouldn't come. A nurse looked up as he entered. "You here for physical therapy?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, PTSD group." The word stuck in his throat, heavy as stone. But once they were out, he felt the weight shift just slightly. He sat down among strangers who weren't really strangers at all. He allowed himself to admit he couldn't carry it alone. Later that week, the town square hosted a quiet memorial for fallen. It wasn't official, just veterans and their families gathering in the cold. A small wooden stand held plaques with names carved into them. Caleb stepped forward, his boots crunching in the snow, and laid down a fresh plate with the name of his closest friend from Kabul. His breath caught as he touched the cold metal. "I couldn't save you," he whispered. His voice trembled, but it wasn't weak. It was human. "But I'll make sure the rest of us don't get forgotten." He stood there a long time, until the cold numbed his fingers and the crowd thinned. When he finally returned to his workshop, the old building looked different. A tarp covered the roof where holes once let the snow in. Stacks of lumber leaned against the wall, a sign of change. It was no longer a place for hiding or drinking himself into silence. It was becoming something else, a place for building. Ash bounded ahead, kicking up powder with every step, nose dusted white. He circled back, tail wagging, eyes fixed on Caleb with loyalty that didn't ask for anything in return. Caleb paused at the threshold, his breath curling in the cold air. The corrugated tin roof gleamed faintly under the winter sun. For years it had loomed over him like a coffin lid, sealing him in with memories he couldn't outrun. Now it felt more like shelter. "This place won't be filled with shadows anymore," he murmured, almost to himself. Ash barked once, sharp and bright, as if agreeing. The old door and ironworks didn't look like a grave anymore. The rust and soot had been scrubbed away, the broken glass replaced, and the hollow clang of machinery swapped for something softer, voices, footsteps, the sound of dogs padding across the floor. A hand-painted sign hung above the wide doors now, Greyhawk Memorial and Healing Center. Inside, the wide space had been divided into rooms with warm light, spilling through windows that once sat boarded up. One wing was for therapy sessions, circles of chairs where men and women sat and spoke words they had once buried. Another corner was set up for training service dogs, the air filled with whistles, laughter, and the occasional bark. On the far wall, a memorial stood, rows of names etched into steel plates salvaged from a factory itself. The metal bore scars of heat and pressure, but polished now, it gleamed, a reminder that broken things could still be made beautiful. Caleb moved through the halls slowly, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. His shoulders still ached, but it wasn't the same pain anymore. Each throb reminded him he was alive, and that he'd chosen a different path than the one Silas tried to drag him down. Ash padded beside him, fur brushed clean, a scar still visible on his leg from the chain that once bound him. Rowan showed up that afternoon, a notebook tucked under her arm, camera slung across her shoulder. She looked around, taking in the transformation with a faint smile. "Hard to believe this is the same place," she said. "Hard to believe I'm the same man," Caleb answered, though he kept his tone quiet. She studied him for a long moment before asking questions she'd been holding back. "Do you think you've won?" He leaned against the rail, watching a group of veterans guide their dogs through an obstacle course. The animals' tails wagged furiously, and the men's shoulders, once hunched, had begun to straighten. Caleb's eyes followed the scene, and his voice came low, gravelly but sure. "No, but at least this time I didn't run." Rowan wrote that down, though she didn't need the words on paper to remember them. She knew they carried more weight than any headline could. Later, as the sun began to fall, the building emptied into a quiet hush. Caleb stepped outside, sitting on the worn steps of the workshop that had once been his refuge and his prison. Ash curled against his legs, head resting on Caleb's thigh. The cold bit at his skin, but he barely noticed. Across the field, a few veterans approached, each walking alongside a dog, some young and eager, others older with gray around the muzzle. Their laughter reached him before their faces came clear, a sound that filled the air where silence used to reign. For Caleb, it felt like the truest victory he could ask for. He remembered Rowan's question and thought of the words he hadn't said. Winning wasn't about taking down Silas or Marielle. It wasn't about proving the town wrong. It was about staying, about choosing not to retreat when storms rose. Family wasn't something written in blood. It was something made in the fire of choice and loyalty. The Japanese had a word for it. Rowan once told him over coffee. Kintsugi, mending what's broken with gold, turning the fractured lines into something stronger, more beautiful. Caleb wasn't there yet, but he could see the path. The horizon burned gold as Montana's sky surrendered to evening. He tilted his head back, watching clouds drift like embers across the wide expanse. Ash stirred, letting out a low sigh content. Caleb reached down, fingers brushing the dog's ear. "We're still here, boy," he whispered. That's when he noticed the envelope. It had been slipped into the mailbox at the edge of the drive, plain and unmarked. He frowned, rising to his feet, Ash trotting after him. He tore it open with a thumb, sliding out a single photograph. The image was old, sepia fading into yellow. His father stood at the center, younger but unmistakable, surrounded by men whose faces were blurred or turned away. On the back, in black ink, one line was written, "This isn't over." Caleb stood in the cold, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. For a long breath, the weight of old fear threatened to creep back in. But when he lifted his gaze, his eyes no longer wavered. The storm would come again, that much was certain. Only this time, he would not face it with trembling hands. He folded the photo, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into his jacket. The sky dimmed, the last light catching the steel roof of the Ironworks Turn Memorial. Behind him, voices and laughter spilled into the evening. Caleb stepped back onto the porch, Ash pressed close at his side. His face, marked with scars and soot, carried something it hadn't in years: steadiness. And as the wind carried the last cries of the day across Greyhawk, he was ready, whatever storm waited on the horizon. When the smoke clears and the fighting ends, what remains isn't just the ruins of old battles, but the choices we carry forward. Caleb's story reminds us that family isn't only about blood. It's about loyalty, courage, and the people who choose to stand beside us when storms come. Sometimes the bravest act isn't striking back, but refusing to let pain define who we are. What about you? Have you ever faced a moment where walking to the fire made you stronger? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for the next journey.